Hello, and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Happy New Year, and thanks so much for listening. Hey, if you weren't aware, I started a Beyond Organic Wine YouTube channel. I love the medium of audio, but there are just some things that it's really hard to understand without seeing them. I'm trying to post 10 to 20 minute videos, though I'm not saying they won't be shorter or longer. There are 3 videos already posted, one from my recent trip to Wales to see the Hebron Vineyard Arbustrum. If you don't know what an arbustrum is, or if you listened to the earlier podcast I did on Hebron Vineyard and have trouble visualizing it, well, that's why I did the video. Honestly, I've looked at, researched, and considered many different kinds of married vine systems, and what Paul and Gemma are doing at Hebron Vineyard is the most efficient, effective, and manageable system I've seen. If you have any interest in vitiforestry, especially married vine systems, you'll definitely want to check it out. And please like and subscribe to the channel while you're there. I'd really appreciate it. I think you'll really like what's coming. Another great resource I wanted to remind you of, beyondorganicwine.com has a recommended reading list. It's where I keep track of all the books that have moved me, informed me, changed my mind, and changed my life. A better name for it than reading list would be rabbit hole. This is my rabbit hole. And one of my tips for defunding the oligarchy this year is to use your public library to read or listen to books. If you don't have a library card, make that the first New Year's resolution you keep this year. And if you have a library card, make using it your first goal. The Libby app is a great way to listen to audiobooks too, and just requires a library card. I should mention that not many of the book recommendations on beyondorganicwine.com are directly related to wine, though many are related to farming, ecology, trees, and plants, and perspectives that shape how we think about and produce wine. And that, to me, is one of the main things I want this podcast and my work to really be about, questioning the assumptions and ideas behind why we do what we do. And this leads me into my most recent book recommendation. If you want some great winter reading, dive into Changes in the Land by William Cronin. The full title is Changes in the Land, Indians, Colonists, and the Ecology of New England. This is the book that describes what happened ecologically to Turtle Island from the moment of first contact on the shores of what we now refer to as New England. One of the incredible values for me of reading this was to see that while the practices and animals that settlers brought had ecological impact, to be sure, it could be argued that the practices the Indians used were just as extreme, burning down sections of the forest and then farming them until the fertility was used up, and then moving on and burning down another section of the forest. It was not the practices, however, but the ideas that the settlers brought with them that affected the extreme changes. Ideas of individualism and individual property ownership, commodity capitalism and resource extraction in order to build personal material wealth, and the unwillingness to limit growth or see limits as natural parts of living in the world. Cronin got me from the first chapter, which is essentially a giant caveat about the limitations of historical research, how prejudice and propaganda and personal and social values and perspectives often inform and color first-person accounts, and of how small a piece of the total we can have a picture of, and therefore how easy it is to have skewed perspectives, and of how what gets attention necessarily belies the many things that don't get attention, because the people from that time who wrote things either didn't experience them or didn't think them significant enough to record. And most importantly, the great lack of perspective of the Indians because of a lack of written records from them. In other words, the absence from the history of a full half, at least, of that history. It's these kinds of admissions, at the outset of presenting arguments and evidence about anything, that get my utmost respect because of the humility and careful thinking they show. I was watching the movie Conclave last night, and one of the great lines that comes from Robert Harris's book, delivered by Vines in the movie, was, quote, "Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance," end quote. As I write in the context of being an American who has inherited and is living out the culture that includes in its DNA everything that happened after first contact, up to and including our current crises that involve economics, politics, and ecology, I want to advocate for uncertainty, which is another way of saying I want to foster unity and tolerance, which are the foundations of community. My inspiration at the start of 2025 comes from remembering that I am not only a child of the ideas that have spread around the globe and degraded its ecologies and replaced its indigenous cultures over the last few centuries, I am also a child of the ecology of this world. I am not just a member of a colonial culture and heir of the ideas of extraction and parasitism. I also belong to this earth, and I have deep symbiotic connections to the entire community of life. So here's a little piece I wrote called The First Principle of Regenerative Viticulture. When most people talk about regenerative viticulture, they think of soil health, how we can use various practices to protect it, build it, grow more delicious wine in it, and sequester carbon in it. I think if we took a random survey of regenerative practitioners and asked what they thought was the most important principle of regenerative viticulture or agriculture in general, they'd say not tilling, or maybe minimizing soil disturbance. Planting cover crops would probably be next, followed by integrating animals, or planting a diversity of species, or always keep the soil covered. We might differ on what we think is the most important principle or practice, but we'd all be essentially talking about rejuvenating our soils. After years of learning about and practicing regenerative agriculture, I've come to believe that we've been wrong. While this initial approach to regenerative agriculture was a necessary and important reaction to the degradation of our farmlands from industrial, conventional agriculture, we've merely been treating the symptoms and not the illness that led to them. I think the first principle of regenerative agriculture is not soil health, but community. Survival of the most symbiotic. In 2021, a forest ecologist published a book that may have the most significant impact on our understanding of life on Earth since On the Origin of Species was published in 1859. The forest ecologist is Suzanne Simard, and she titled her book Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest. It tells her personal journey as a female scientist navigating the male-dominated discipline of forestry and relates the results of multiple worldview-changing studies she conducted on forest ecosystems. I can't do justice to this book in a brief summary, but one of the most important truths she discovered was that there is just as much collaboration as competition happening in nature. It turns out that the biggest, strongest, and fastest does not equal the fittest for survival. Resilience comes from social engagement. Studies have shown that the more connected you are to your community, the greater your chance of weathering disaster. In many animal and human groups throughout the world, might does not confer power and influence as much as the ability to be of service to the community and build coalitions does. Our conception of regenerative agriculture has grown out of our disconnection from the community of life, out of an idea of separateness and the preeminence of competition. We humans see nature as something apart from us that we can visit and interact with as tourists, or use and exploit to extract goods that meet our physical needs. We define, quote, natural and, quote, unnatural in terms of the absence or presence of human influence. We have excommunicated ourselves from nature. This is the break that must be reconciled, the relationship that needs to be regenerated. As it turns out, we only left nature in our minds. In an ironic reverse matrix twist, we've thought ourselves isolated from nature, living out our lives in unnatural cities and towns, disconnected from the real dirty world of nature. But all along we have not only been deeply embedded in the systems of nature, we are nature. The horror of waking up after taking this red pill is not to discover that we've been enslaved by machines, but to discover that we've been the enslavers of ourselves. The example of the vines. I actually don't like the term, quote, nature. It's kind of meaningless once you stop seeing yourself as separate from it. I've begun replacing it with my community. It never resonated with me to see myself as a steward or manager of land. On the other hand, when I began to see myself in a relationship with my community, I began to give the other members agency and equal standing with me in decision-making and direction. I began to listen better because community implies dialogue with all stakeholders. This growing season, I got to see a lot of different approaches to viticulture, many claiming to be quote-unquote regenerative because of their practices around soil health. Yet many of these same approaches neglected or did the bare minimum for the well-being of the human, animal, or other communities that were part of the same land. They weren't engaging with their community, but merely imposing their viticultural whims on a piece of land, quote-unquote regeneratively. This kind of regenerative wine growing seems hollow to me and destined for failure when the money runs out or when the fossil fuels run out or when the trendiness wears off. Yea, though I fathom all the mysteries of the soil food web and comprehend all scientific studies of the soil microbiome, yet have not love, I am nothing. Resilience and regeneration seem to me to come from investing time and resources into the health of the entire community. This means that we can't slap some soil health practices on an otherwise conventional system and call it regenerative. We need to rethink our systems with a new vision of interconnectedness to everything, the whole community of humans and non-humans, and rebuild them from the ground up, allowing the rest of our community to weigh in on how we do this. The humbling thing is that grapevines and other plants, the elders in our community, have been leading by example, so to speak, since we humans came onto the scene relatively recently. They've learned or evolved to use up to 30% of their energy to feed some of the members of their community who share the soil with them. They serve the above-ground communities by creating the air we all need to survive. And they are in constant communication and collaboration with the diversity of lives they touch. 30%. That's not a tithe. That's an investment. Radical indigenization. The term community may resonate in our minds in a very human-centric way. We may think of community as the people near us. While focusing on the human members of our community is vitally important, that isn't where our kinship ends. What if we expanded the idea of community to include all of the aspects of the world on which we are dependent for our own lives? What if we thought of community as that to which we owe gratitude for our existence? That would mean that the microbes in the soil would be part of our community, as they make our food and wine possible. But also the plants, trees, vines, and their pollinators and propagators, birds, insects, animals. They provide the food and wine and oxygen that makes us possible. The sun, sky, rain, oceans, and rocks are all necessary to create the soil and grow the plants and sustain all the lives that enable us to live. I feel grateful to have them in my community. The moon and stars and the balance of all the forces of the galaxies that have held our planet in just the right spot, just the right ecological niche in the universe to enable life to emerge as it hurtles through space. The entire connected universe, quote-unquote nature, is our community. The Thanksgiving address is the central prayer and invocation, not related to the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday, for the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. It reflects their relationship of giving thanks for life and the world around them. The Haudenosaunee open and close every social and religious meeting with the Thanksgiving address. And I got to hear this in the Onondaga language on the Onondaga Reservation this past Indigenous Peoples Day. It is worth reading the translation. I will link it in the show notes, or just search and find one online. It's also said as a daily sunrise prayer, and it's an ancient message of peace and appreciation of Mother Earth and her inhabitants. Children learn that, according to Native American tradition, people everywhere are embraced as family. Our diversity, like all wonders of nature or our community, is a gift for which to be thankful. This prayer of thanksgiving is referred to as the words that come before all else. I think that this kind of gratitude is a great first step to re-indigenizing ourselves, to re-envisioning ourselves as part of our community, and regenerating our relationships with all the members of it. Thank you for being part of my community. As I attempt to encourage community, I sincerely want to engage with you. If you are a Patreon subscriber, I'd love to hear any questions that you'd love to hear me address on the podcast or YouTube channel for that matter. And whether you're a Patreon subscriber or not, you can email me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. I look forward to connecting with you this year.